thanks Ariella and Ella and all the team at HRAFF. This is one of my favourite little film festivals, which is now a very big film festival, so it's a joy to be part of this. I'm going to talk really quickly, and I should be able to get through it in about an hour and a half. If you need to go to the bathroom, or if you get really bored, I promise I won't be offended if you leave. But we'll go through, and then I'm hoping that we'll have about half an hour for questions, because hopefully this will sort of stimulate lots of thoughts and issues, and you'll disagree with the sort of stuff I'm putting up, or agree, or otherwise. So if that sounds okay, we'll keep going. So today I'll run through a few definitions. I think it's really important to understand what outreach and education means. There's a lot of confusion there. I'll run through why, if you're a filmmaker, you'd even bother with outreach and education, and the implications of getting philanthropic funding. Actually, how many filmmakers are in the crowd as a matter of interest? Great, okay, well, this is sort of directed pretty closely towards you. I'll give some case studies from our own experience at Shark Island Productions. We've made a huge amount of mistakes over the years, and I think sometimes the scar tissue is as important as trying to show what worked. Then there are 20 rules of outreach and education. There's probably a million rules, but I can only think of 20, so I'll share those with you. Then I think you'll find really interesting this best of guide, that there are some really outstanding organisations around the world who are doing incredible things, and I think you'll find that quite interesting. Then we've got 11 US docs that have actually made quite an impact in their own right. And then a very recent film I'll give you an example of, which is called No Fire Zone, which as a result of the film, a new investigation of the United Nations led by the UNHCR has just gone into the war crimes in Sri Lanka, and directly as a result of a profound outreach campaign of a documentary. And then we'll have a Q&A. So quickly, some definitions. Education, in really simple terms, is getting your film into schools and providing and creating materials such as study guides, curriculum resources, and other sort of screenings and discussions. Outreach is more the engagement with the community at a national or a global level, and sort of what you're doing with the film out there, and how you're engaging with foundations and not-for-profits and NGOs and working up coalitions. That's very much outreach, and how you're targeting government. Audience engagement is when you sort of move a film, move an audience from passive viewing to active involvement. And so the overall strategy will be this audience engagement strategy. Community engagement's often used, and I sort of say it's all wrapped up into one. People often confuse outreach with distribution. So outreach is not a film festival screening, although a film festival screening is a very, very important part of the first stage of it, or the DVD release or anything like that. That's not outreach, that's just pure marketing and distribution. So outreach is very much that next step. There's a wonderful fund in the US that gives funding specifically for outreach called the Fledgling Fund. And they've defined distribution, outreach and audience engagement in a pretty simple way. They've got this cute little video which goes for about 90 seconds, which will sort of explain what that chart meant. So at the end of the day, it's, for those of you who are filmmakers, you realise that once you've finished your film, you're absolutely exhausted and you've got no money left, and the house is mortgaged and credit cards are all bouncing, and here I am saying, well, you've got to go that next step. But it is worth it, and this is why we're bringing Good Pitch to Australia, and we set up Documentary Australia Foundation and things like that, because we're trying to bring more funding into the sector so that it actually makes it possible that, as we know, Screen Australia and most of the other government funding bodies actually don't provide any funding for outreach, but we're trying to create this philanthropic model, and that's exploding in the States, and we're just hoping that we'll be able to create this sustainable funding base here. So why bother with outreach and education? Firstly, it increases the audience of the film. Most documentaries in Australia actually aren't lucky enough to get a broadcast, but you do want to find an audience, and you can find wonderful audiences that aren't necessarily on television through community screenings or through the web, and it's just, you've just got to think of it a little more laterally about where your audience may be. It enables your film to raise awareness and engage community, stimulate action. You know, you don't want to go through all this process of making a film and then just having it sit in the bottom drawer. You do want it to try and create some sort of impact. It potentially gives the filmmaker access to not-for-profit organisations and makes the film eligible for philanthropic support. Foundations and not-for-profits aren't going to work with your film if they think you're not going to do anything with it. If you show that you actually are wanting to raise awareness about the issue, you actually do have this access to philanthropic funding. Most of the films, whether around Indigenous issues or environment or human rights or whatever it is, these are the sorts of areas that the foundations are typically funding too. So there's immediately this wonderful connection. There's about 5,000 foundations in Australia, and as I mentioned, they're in these areas of social welfare, arts, health, etc., and giving somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion per annum. And it's really important that we can try and tap into that to get this recurring source of funding for documentaries. The other thing that the donors are looking for is some sort of leverage and sustainability with their grant. The great thing about a film is you make it once, yet it can go on for many, many years. So the benefits of them participating in the film and the outreach program can be felt for many years, and that's just wonderful sort of philanthropy when that's happening. It's interesting, in the States it's less so, but in Australia it's virtually impossible to attract private investment into a documentary, as we all know. I mean, if your opening pitch is, I'm going to guarantee that you're going to lose money on your investment and you'll never ever get your money back, it's a very hard position to start with. But only about 8 films in Australia, strangely enough, have actually even broken even. It's such a subsidised industry, so it's very difficult to attract private investment. But increasingly, it's far more attractive to attract philanthropic funding, where you can say to the funders, we're going to give you a real return on your social capital, which is a more intangible but very real thing. And I'll talk about some case studies about how we measure that and how you can effectively pitch to actually get philanthropic funding. It's also a recurring source of funding that these private funders like to give to the same organisation, often for 3 to 5 years, and that can be a wonderful thing. Or many filmmakers in the States, increasingly here, who have been getting philanthropic funding, will find they can go back to the same funders year after year. Whereas often Screen Australia or ABC, they'll go, oh, no, we've sort of done you a favour, we'll go on to someone else. And it's great to be able to create these relationships. One of the great things about philanthropic funding as well, unlike investment or a loan, is it's not paid back. So it makes the break even of your film so much more attractive that if half your film is funded philanthropically, your break even is obviously significantly less, and that makes a huge difference. And then if you're eligible for the producer offset scheme, you've actually got a chance to try and break even. So it's changing the whole dynamic, if we can make this a sustainable funding source, it's changing the whole dynamic of documentary filmmaking in Australia, which is really exciting. There are other advantages of working with not-for-profits or NGOs. Again, if you're making a film about a specific aspect of human rights or the environment or whatever, these NGOs can have a huge wealth of experience. You're not wanting to make advertorials, and I'll go into that in detail, but they can have connections or ideas or help you with arguments. They can also be a partner for all your community engagement activities. That when we saw an Inconvenient Truth and they partnered with the Australian Conservation Foundation, they had hundreds of community screenings all around Australia with their members, and you've got this organisation that will help you distribute the film. The other thing is that these not-for-profits are permanent organisations. They're there long after the film's been made, so it can keep your film alive, which is something you want to do. You know, I think we're motivated by doing this because we see so many great stories being made in Australia, but it's just so tragic when you think that, again, you know, not enough of them make an impact and they don't get seen, and there's so much more potential. I'm just going to run through a few case studies from our production company. We really try and spend a lot of time creating these extensive outreach and education campaigns and combining our films with the not-for-profit sector to try and make an impact. I'll give you 4 case studies. They're all very different ones. One's on the Oasis, which is a feature documentary on youth homelessness. Another one, Polly and Me, on child abuse. Paul Kelly, which was Portrait of an Artist. And that's interesting because you think, how on earth could a film like that get philanthropic funding? But I'll run through that. And another one we've just completed with a group of first-time offenders in a maximum security prison. And that was a film which wasn't made for broadcast, but it's got a very different audience. So hopefully out of this you'll get 4 different perspectives. So Oasis, it was a feature documentary. Some of you may have seen it, filmed over 3 years. When we brought it out in 2008, homelessness had really been off the agenda for the past 20 years. It's been 20 years since the Burdekin report. We wanted to produce a really important feature documentary that created the face of homelessness, but also back it up with a strategy, with a report that had been commissioned and philanthropically funded and that could be presented to the government, and have a very extensive outreach and education campaign. I'll just show you the first couple of minutes of the film in case you haven't seen it.
Let me go, let me go, let me go.
Oh, no.
No, hospital. Let me go, let me go, let me go.
Oh, it's Captain Paul Moles here. Can you send an ambulance to the Oasis Youth Refuge? 365 Crown Street, Surrey Hills. No, it's no police. You just got to go to hospital. You've got to go and have a check-up. That's another night at Oasis. Australia isn't the lucky country for every kid. I mean, there are just heaps of them out there, you know, living in refuges, on the streets, squats, abandoned buildings, under bridges. I mean, I've worked with these kids for 25 years, and the reality is they're pretty damaged. They do rip people off. They do rob houses and break into cars and act aggressively. These kids exist in the community. The challenge is, what are we going to do about it?
Good morning, Owen. You look beautiful this morning, mate. Your hair looks grouse.
Hi, Paul.
Hey, Rodney. How you going, my friend?
It was me and him.
Are you a witness?
Yeah.
Get for him or against him?
Yeah, for him.
To say that he didn't do it?
Yeah.
Oh, did you see the nurses yesterday?
Yeah, they gave
Did
me.
they just say what you should do? Or I thought, there is no way in the world the Tammy I know that would have done that. Were you drunk or something?
I was off my medication.
Because that's not like you to do that, is it?
No.
Oh, that's Renee. Hey, Renee. Unfortunately, Renee slept out last night, so she's just catching up on some sleep. Oops, no keys. Hello, Jen. Hi, Daniel. Daniel. Could you open the door? Thanks, mate. Thanks, mate. If you want to manage it with me over the next few days, I'm happy to work
no, I do not.
Well, then go and find someone else to cash up with, okay?
Who else is going to fucking cash
If you want me to manage this with you,
I don't want no money. I want the whole fucking lot. You
then
can't
go
manage
to
my
cash
fucking
stock.
money.
Go to cash stock then, okay?
This?
Yes, mate.
I'm burning.
Darren, you don't need to talk like that.
Don't, Aaron.
You want me to help you manage it over the
No,
next
you're
few
not
days?
managing my fucking money. It's my fucking money. I want my money.
Okay, well then go and cash it, okay?
I want to fucking cash it right now.
Okay. We're not here, mate. We're not a bank, okay?
Settle.
You said you were going to fucking cash it, you dog.
Settle down.
You're a fucking lying dog. You know that? Well, you're lying dog.
Can we do that tomorrow, Reg? Thank you, mate. I'm just sort of, it's just like he's away, everyone's out today, and it's just, yeah, well, no, Ken's here, but like Carol's not in, so it's just a bit chaos, okay? Thanks, mate. I appreciate that. Bye-bye.
You know what I mean?
There's no doubt these are tough kids. I mean, they come from tough backgrounds and they're tough to deal with. I mean, they've got mental health issues, they've got drug and alcohol addictions. Some of them have spent their whole life in state care. Some of them have been abused, some tortured, some neglected badly. But because they're tough kids doesn't mean that we should put them in the too hard basket and believe that nothing can ever change.
So we had a pretty extensive community engagement strategy. We launched the report and the documentary during National Youth Week with the then Minister for Housing, Tanya Plevisek. We worked very closely with the ABC and created what they called then event television. So they gave us a primetime screening, which again is much harder to get now, and then coupled it with what actually was the pilot for Q&A with Tony Jones. And so we had this 2.5-hour dedicated program, and we got a large audience, and that was really important to kickstart the campaign. We had parliamentary screenings in Canberra and private screenings all around Australia. We got philanthropic funding to distribute the DVD to schools and to all the politicians and CEOs of top 100 companies. And actually that was, when I talked about some of the mistakes, that actually had virtually no impact at all, just sending a DVD to a politician or a CEO without any follow-up. That was actually a waste of time. But other areas which were more targeted made a much bigger impact. We produced a number of different school curriculum resources, and it's really pleasing to see that about 30% of all schools across Australia are actually studying the Oasis in the National English curriculum. And it took a lot of energy to actually get it into the school system, but that we're hoping over a 20-year period, a bit like the environmental movement, that there'll be a much greater understanding of the plight of homelessness in Australia than there was with the previous generation. We had a couple of follow-up films, stories, and I'll show you a case study with Polly and me, that we found there was just a huge incidence of abuse amongst these kids, sexual abuse and other sort of abuse from the environments in which they've grown up. But that's a very difficult topic to actually tell in a feature documentary, so we made a sort of a docudrama out of it, but it was an important one in terms of keeping the issue alive. We got again funding to appoint a schools liaison officer, and there's this remarkable young girl who was homeless at the time who's gone round and actually presented to over 30,000 school kids across New South Wales, and it's proven to be a very, very good social return for the foundation that gave the funding to actually again speak to these kids and really get them to understand homelessness. So it's had a reasonable impact. As I say, the big audience on ABC, a lot of people were exposed to it during the launch. Because we took this our whole independent report to the federal government, they decided to come out with a green paper and a white paper, and they brought several $1 billion into the industry. The Red Shield appeal was up, school funding raising activities right across Australia, huge amount of instances where kids were motivated. Anyway, lots and lots of elements there where we could measure the impact. So the funders felt that they'd, having decided whether or not they were going to give just a food and shelter, which was very important, they said, no, let's also give to something which is going to raise awareness about homelessness. So that was very useful. This follow-up film, Holly and Me, is this docudrama about child abuse seen through the eyes of an 8-year-old girl. And we can see at the same time where levels of homelessness were going up through 100,000 people, child abuse and neglect were at record levels. And this is before all these inquests and inquiries came out. And we worked very hard behind the scenes to actually make sure that a lot of the governments and organisations were really aware of how major the problem was. We wanted to have a whole of community response, so we got 13 different non-profit organisations together to try and create a bit of a coalition. We underestimated how difficult that was to actually get a single voice amongst a group of not-for-profits is virtually impossible. A number of reasons why, but I think everyone's quite scared of limited funding and not necessarily wanting to collaborate. And I think it's one of the greatest challenges for the not-for-profit sector is we need much more collaboration. And I think films can bring organisations together quite significantly. And then we've got 14 different foundations to help fund the film. This is a little clip from it. It's hard to get a film on the ABC, but again, because they saw that it wasn't a short fiction film, that it was sufficient docudrama. Again, they showed it in prime time, and we had a live Q&A with Geraldine Doo afterwards. So again, it was a very good way to kickstart the campaign to actually work with the ABC and create something that they could sort of run with.
Seen my keys?
No.
If you've hidden my keys, you can forget your fucking picnic. At least you've got a mum to look after you.
Where is she?
With all of our partners, we produced these 10 information kits that they could use for fundraising and raising awareness. Had specific community screenings with each of these non-for-profits. We got funding with the national body to produce a presentation kit so that social workers right around Australia could show the film and run through all the key issues, both as a way of training other social workers or raising awareness in their communities. And that's been used very extensively. We've had incredible feedback on that. So we had the prime time screening on ABC. Some unlikely partners popped up, the police and ambulance and fire brigade, and quite often they're the first on the scene. So, for example, in New South Wales, the police force bought 800 DVDs and used it as their major training film around the issues of child abuse. And again, that can be a really great way for not only getting income for your film, but also getting it out and used in ways that perhaps you wouldn't have thought about. This resource, this is the one which we produced with NatCam, which I can't stop it, but it'll go for about a minute, but is basically the slideshow that the workers in the space use after they've seen the film. And we produced extensive study guide notes. There's another guide that actually runs through how to host a screening and how to present the information and how to deal with the sensitivity of the information. And so it could be a whole morning's masterclass around this film. But again, because we did this, we could completely fund the film philanthropically, and we feel in its own way it's made a very pleasing impact, despite the fact that it's still totally unacceptable how many kids were abused in Australia. It was just another little way of helping. But without this, we just wouldn't have been able to get any of the funding. And all this information is available on either the Shark Island website or the Polly and Me website if you just wanted to go in and just see a case study. So again, it was a powerful coalition. It was difficult, and I don't think we achieved exactly what we wanted to, but it's quite a good model. So those are slightly different ones. This next film, Paul Kelly's Stories of Me, is it's a film about Paul Kelly, the singer-songwriter. We wanted to do a portrait of an artist, and we wanted to tell an important, engaging story, but we felt that there was great potential to put increasingly Australian voices in the national curriculum. And one of the great things things about Paul Kelly as a songwriter is his canon is very varied, and so we felt that teachers would love the variety of issues that are raised, whether it's around issues around Indigenous issues, or love and sex, or drugs, or religion, or identity, or poetry, or landscape, any of these sorts of things. And using this film, we also thought that maybe we could identify the importance of music in schools, because in New South Wales, for example, there are about 800 schools that don't have adequate music tuition, so we did an alignment with the Music Council Australia and got funding for a report there. So one was the education strategy and the other was the outreach strategy. And again, it's not necessarily a profound human rights issue, but it again enabled us to get at least a third of the funding philanthropically for this film. This I think you might find interesting. There's a theatrical trailer, and then we reproduced a specific trailer for the outreach, and they're very, very different. And a lot of this stuff, when you're thinking about outreach and education, you've got to very much define your audiences. A lot of film trailers will absolutely be right for the same, for both. In the instance of the Paul Kelly film, there are a lot of issues around, I guess he's a musician, sex and drugs and rock and roll. So, but for the school system, we had to take out a lot of the drug and sex references, which again a lot of the teachers have said was totally unnecessary. They prefer to show the feature-length version. But this was the trailer for the cinema release and TV version of the film.
He was raw, he was sexual, he had this fantastic energy that just filled the room.
I think it's the love songs that define him. He is the romantic poet.
And I realised that, like, he was the guy that wrote basically everything.
Here is one of the hottest new groups to, I reckon, emerge in 1980, Paul Kelly and the Dots.
I think he's one of those guys, he wanted to be as good as his heroes. He wanted to be a great songwriter.
Are you very ambitious, do you think?
Yeah.
I wanted to write great songs. That's what the ambition was and is.
His songs have trapped his life so closely.
And no one actually knows where the truth ends and where the fiction begins.
He really is not an open book.
Jimmy Rogers!
The way to Paul is through his songs.
There's a strong streak of social responsibility in there.
Bad things happen when good people sit in silence, and Paul doesn't sit in silence.
But I, want to be careful not to make him a saint, because he ain't a saint.
I had a dream. I'd had troubles keeping bands together. My marriage had broken up. I wasn't writing any songs.
It was just given that musicians were pretty wasted.
I tried most things. Heroin was a drug that I just had an affinity with.
Out of that suffering and loss has come his art.
Sick of murder, never had no money. Then when he got laid off, it really hit the skids. He was riding through the cane in the pouring rain on the Cassidy.
Paul speaks to us about our Australianness, and that is a priceless thing.
Then for the schools version, I think it's over the years when we've been trying to get our films into schools that we've realised, the hard-working teachers out there have got little time to actually be made even aware of these materials. So you have to make it easy for the teachers, and you have to really be able to show the relevance to them of how they can use a film in the classroom, especially when you're dealing with years 10, 11 and 12, that time is so short that they actually can't take a risk on a resource that's actually not going to work for them or be difficult to teach or not be relevant enough. So for this trailer, we actually highlighted literally all the key words throughout the curriculum that were important, so that they actually see the links for this resource without actually having seen the film. So this was the trailer specifically for the education sector.
Who is Paul Kelly?
Welcome strangers to the show. I'm the one who should be lying low. So the knives out, turn my back. Heard the train coming, stayed right on that track in the middle.
Paul has that great concept of oral history being told one way, and that's through song. But when you go back 150 years, everybody's culture around the world virtually was carried through song and through storytelling and dance, art, music.
I think personally Paul's a bit of a slippery fish because of his complexities. He really is not an open book, and kind of the way to Paul is through his songs.
Paul is a fiction writer in the medium of songs, and he writes very personal songs. But he crafts the songs in the same way that a fiction writer does, in that he creates a new story.
His voice covers everyone, you know, from a guy in jail to, you know, an addict to a woman looking after her kids, being left by a husband to, you know, to Aboriginal people, to a hobo living under a bridge. I mean, he gets inside the head of these people that he talks about and tells the story from their point of view.
I mean, he's endlessly curious about human beings and the way they tick. And when you are that and you turn that into being a great observer and a great listener, you get great material.
If you borrow something, it's quite obvious that you've borrowed it, but if you steal something, a good thief will hide it or absorb it somehow.
It's a modern day bard, you know? Australia's own. Paul Kelly, I reckon, anyway. And, you know, we need a good bard. You know, it's been an old tradition to have a bard, you know, a poet.
I think it's the love songs that define him. You know, he is the romantic poet in song. And there isn't practically an aspect of love that he hasn't written about.
Paul's always been really ambitious. I mean, I think he's one of those guys, he wanted to be as good as his heroes, you know? He wanted to be a great songwriter.
Evening. Everybody good?
Makes me want to go back to school. But it's had a wonderful impact, that, and then it's only been released since February, and on early indications that already 15 to 20% of all schools around Australia are actually using the resource, which is really great to see. So our strategy was to have an event release of the film around Australia. Madman did a great job. We actually had the bulk of our cinema release strategy was with 8 screenings. We hired huge venues around Australia, Hamer Hall down here, filled that, probably charged way too much. We charged $45 a head, and then Paul came out and sang a few songs, and then the highlight was there was a Q&A with me, which just, you know, was fabulous. And then everyone went home, but it was again a way of sort of thinking outside the square rather than putting a huge amount of resources into a traditional release, is actually making it short and punchy. And then we released a schools version of the film, and that's being streamed into schools. Had a lot of accompanying materials so that teachers could grab it. A whole lot of essays were written, and then we had a launch of the National Portrait Gallery with the then Minister for Education, Peter Garrett, and the Arts Minister. And anyway, there was a lot of noise around it, which enabled us to raise awareness, especially for our key targeted audience in the outreach campaign, or the education campaign, being the schools. Again, ABC supported it, and they gave it a good screening slot, which is getting harder and harder, trying to find enough room for a feature documentary slot on the broadcasters is a challenge, but anyway, they were kind enough to show that. Then, final case study to do quickly. This is a very low budget film. We were approached by a group of first-time offenders in Port Phillip Prison, and they'd seen our work on the Oasis, and they wanted to tell their stories about how they got in there and how they made the wrong decisions, and trying to deter other young people from making the same bad choices. This is we spent about a year working with them and creating a program whereby they learned how to use cameras and edit and talking about photography and interview techniques. And again, this was the film was totally funded philanthropically just because of these sorts of endeavours. So the activity itself can create attention from funders, thinking actually this is a very good program to have in prison. The intent of this was never to get it on broadcast television. The intent was very much to get it again into schools and to create a good study guide. And so for you don't have to always be thinking, I've got to get this prime time screening or I have to have a cinema release. This was very much a sort of a much less ambitious intention. But again, if you've got something like this, you can create a relationship with NGOs and donors, and then they may be there in a much bigger way for your next film. So this is just the first couple of minutes of the film to get an idea of it.
Yeah, it was the same bus that they take you everywhere in. Like, it's the bus that they take you to court in. It's not like jail buses you see on TV. They're like little steel rooms, probably 1.5 metres by 1 metre.
Step down first. Step on the back yellow line. State your full name, CRN.
I was trying to remain calm and, just take it all in my stride. Just be like, it can't be that bad. It can't be that bad.
Step forward. Grab your property box.
You go up to, property, you check in all your normal casual clothes and you say goodbye to them and you get your green tracksuit.
2 sets of greens, one to wear, one to wash. Step into the strip room. Just step up the back first. Inside your mouth, lift your tongue, lift your tackle, turn around for us, spread your cheeks, grab your bag, follow me, we'll head down to the unit.
The full impact of it didn't really hit me coming to jail until I come to jail. And I realised, this is my life. I'm going to have to adjust to this.
Keep heading down the path.
Hey, mate!
The worst thing about coming into prison is probably thinking about who you're going to be bunking with the first night.
I remember I got my blankets.
Grab your bag, take you up to your cell.
I cocooned myself and I put me back against the wall. And yeah, I sort of slept with one eye open that night. The first night I was pretty scared. I just sort of sunk in and I was shitting myself.
And, the first night I got there I was feeling freezing cold because I didn't know to put a door snake under the door, so I slept with a towel on my bed. Yeah, when I did see my cell, I sat down and was like, oh shit, is this really it? Is this where I'm going to be living for the next years?
All I got from the accident, is a scar. And, some little kids, what they got from it is they lost their mum, their nan. Some poor bloke's lost his wife. You know what I mean? The lady's lost her life, and just for me being stupid for 5 or 10 minutes, just eats you up inside.
From the moment you are put into prison, this is what happens. Everything about your life is controlled by officers. You are told when to eat, when to sleep, when to go to your cell, when to go to a program, when to go to work, when to go to a visit, when to go to outpatients, and you have no control whatsoever in relation to any of those things.
Catches. Right.
So again, the film was a group of stories told by these first-time prisoners. The young inmates were motivated to tell their stories. The strategy right from the start was to screen the documentary into the classrooms. The report actually is still being written. That's been quite contentious. We worked with a not-for-profit organisation, Igniting Change, and they actually introduced us to a huge number of their donors, and so again this film was able to be pretty much entirely philanthropically funded, and then we were in the process of releasing it, but Toll Holdings, for example, is one of the largest employers of prisoners who have been released, and to actually be able to work with them in part of the outreach strategy is going to be exciting, but it's early days with that film. So I'll just now quickly run through these sort of what I call 20 rules of outreach and education. It's really important to know that outreach and education starts in pre-production. Once the film's done, it's almost too late. You've got to be thinking all the way along about the audiences and funding opportunities and what impact you're going to make, and it's a really exciting part of the process, and it may even shift elements of your story as a result, but you don't want to be leaving it to the last minute. With an inconvenient truth, Al Gore was actually in outreach mode even before the film was made, and that's not always going to be the case, but it's an important element. One other thing too is, with Paul Kelly, the only reason Paul Kelly said yes to the film, because he'd been approached by filmmakers for years, is because he could actually see the intent with our education strategy, and in many ways that sort of gave him permission to say, okay, I'll agree to it, rather than just simply being sort of a vanity project. So again, it can be very important with getting access, and when we went into the prison, when they could see what we were doing with it, they were far more willing to allow a professional film crew in, because they saw what we were trying to do. So it can make a big difference to access if you've got it doesn't have to be a completely watertight outreach program design, but to actually say, this is what we're wanting to do with it. So it's worked very well for us over time. Rule number 2, communicate with your donors and investors every step of the way. Engage them as many times as you can. People don't actually want to write a check anymore. They want to be involved. They want to be engaged. They can add a huge amount of value to your process. That again, if you've got a philanthropic group that specifically gives to a sector that you're making a film about, they'll probably know all the players in the industry, and they can help you find funders, but equally they can provide a lot of wealth of information about the topic. If you get some funding from a philanthropic body and you don't look after them and keep them engaged, you're probably never going to get another check from them, but if you do, you've probably got them for life. Someone like Ken Burns, he had a 20-year relationship with grants from General Motors. Again, this is not advertising, it's not sponsorship, it was philanthropic funding, and he got over $50 million of funding from them just because he really engaged them in the process. And that started with Civil War. You've got to think in 3 to 5 year cycles. If you're trying to make an impact, you're just not going to do it in a 12-month period, let alone a 5-year. But when you're asking for funding, try and think of ways in which you can get your funders, or even the not-for-profit groups you're working with, to think in a much longer cycle. You'll have a much greater impact, but equally it's probably what they're looking for as well. With our homeless film, the Oasis, that came out in 2008, and we're still coming up with new initiatives and still raising funding and still working with that film in many ways, and you know, that's very nourishing for funders when they can see that you're still there using their initial funding in new ways. It's important to identify how you're going to measure impact, and all organisations have to do that. It's often the hardest part of the process, but one of the most important. So, you know, are you wanting legislative change? Are you wanting to raise awareness? Are you wanting to get a huge amount of kids in the school system to watch the film? Whatever it is, you've got to actually work out what your ask is and whether or not you can show that you've actually achieved all your objectives. A lot of films, I'll show you some other case studies soon, but film Lioness, you know, that led to legislative change in the States. Under the Women's Veterans Healthcare Improvement Act, it was the catalyst for legislative change. And there's quite a few examples like that, and you may have seen the film Invisible War, and that led to legislative change, etc. So that was a directly measurable outcome, and you know, not always the case, but in that instance it was. With outreach, don't reinvent the wheel. You can repackage it. You don't need to commission a report. There's so much information out there that you can repackage it. We're actually doing that with our prison report. We're just bringing all the information together in a short, punchy piece, and you can release it, and then the press have got something to hold on to. You can repackage existing documentaries around your film. We're actually at the moment looking for a whole lot of the key films around the prison system, and we're going to get a group of funders and government organisations together for a day's screening to really talk about the prison system. You know, you can find ways of creating quite a buzz around a film without actually having to use a lot of funding, and use the best practice outreach strategies that are already there in existence. And the bottom point is, don't be afraid to use how can you help lists and credits. People say, oh, it's been done, Inconvenient Truth did it, but it's still really effective. People at the end of the film, if they've been moved, they want to know what they can do. You know, you can't leave them feeling helpless. You've got to empower them. And in that moment when the credits are coming up, it's a really good way to actually just let the issues, you know, settle, and you're in the dark, and it can be incredibly effective. So, you know, don't run away from that opportunity just because it's been done. Events are quite important, you know, to make some noise. If you can find a politician or a personality, that can actually help. Think outside the square with Inconvenient Truth. They found these ambassadors, and they had thousands of private screenings. Again, you don't have to have it on television. You can have 10 people to heaps of screenings all around your community, and actually make an impact in your local community. You know, with Paul Kelly, we only had 8 screenings. They were big ones, but we didn't have to go through the whole cinema release. Social media obviously is important. Rule number 7, create bite-sized films too. But films of 10 to 20 minutes, or even 1 to 3 minutes, can be used really effectively in your campaign. Just taking little bits out of your film and reworking them, and you can send them virally, or NGO partners can use them in ways that you don't have to sit down and watch 90 minutes of a film. Those of you who've seen The Cove, there was a really interesting little additional film on Mercury. It went for 15 minutes. Had it been in the film, it would have killed the film, but it was a great little sort of add-on which contextualised one of the key points. Rule number 7, think big and or small. You don't have to solve the problems of the world with your films. Some of the most effective screenings have been with very targeted small groups. Another really cute little film you may have seen called Brooklyn Castle. The objective of that film, the film's campaign, was to actually save a school's chess program. And they could see that the chess program was doing profound things for kids. It was getting them to the school. It was creating a great sense of sort of competition and camaraderie and self-empowerment. And that film is used as a case study for a whole lot of other schools around Brooklyn, around chess programs or other after-school programs. And again, you know, you're not dealing with global warming or climate change, but in that little community there was a very measurable, profound effect. And you know, sometimes this stuff scares us when we think too big, but thinking small can just be so meaningful. When you're dealing with a not-for-profit, try and harness the sector too. You don't really want to align yourself just with one organisation, and you certainly don't want them trying to dictate what goes in the film, and you don't want them to, to be too closely aligned. If you can actually get a whole sector, a bit like we did with the child abuse one, rather than centred around one specific organisation, you'll find there's a much greater audience. One of the most difficult things, but it's really important to do, is try and get this collective ask from the sector. That if, I often ask a group around the table, if you've got 10 minutes with the Prime Minister, what is it you're going to ask? And it can take months and months to reach that consensus. Might not even happen, but it's well worth asking. It's interesting. In New South Wales, there are over 1,000 cancer organisations in New South Wales alone. It's it's quite a diversified sector. When you're getting your film out there, don't spray and pray. We made a lot of mistakes when we just sort of thought we could send the film out and something would happen. But it's very important that you've got scarce resources. You've got to target it very quick, very effectively. Study guides might be good, but not necessarily. I reckon over 90% of study guides are probably never looked at by teachers. So just because you've got a study guide doesn't mean it's going to be used in the schools. You've got to follow up. You've got to find champion teachers. You've got to get them to show other teachers or other schools how to use it. So finding champions in those specific areas can be useful. And again, just because the school's got the DVD doesn't mean they're going to see it. But you've got to sort of go the hard yards. And don't make your ask too broad. One of the things you've got to be aware of if you're making films about global poverty or global warming or health or whatever is it's very difficult to specifically measure the impact of your film. You've got a very narrow ask. Again, your funders will be able to see the impact of the film. So as I mentioned, define the ask, and it's quite good to say, well, at the end of the film, when the credits are coming up, what will the audience want to do? We learned that from the Oasis. We actually didn't have the answers, and there was this huge outpouring of support after the ABC screening, and people would be turning up to the youth refuge literally with bags of money or saying what can they do to help, and we actually hadn't defined it enough. We had it at the micro level. We had this whole comprehensive report we took to government with 80 recommendations, but in the community level we hadn't thought that through enough, and that was a really wasted opportunity. Inconvenient truth. This is what came up at in the credits. Change a light bulb, drive less, recycle more. But good old-fashioned values. But it actually enabled people to start thinking how they could help and empower them. This is sort of good news and bad news. But you, the filmmaker, have to be the champion. You can outsource outreach and education to impact producers, and that may be effective. But at the end of the day, the greatest impact will be if you're able there to summon the energy and raise the funds to go all the way through with it. Classic example is with the very personal story in Gasland. But the filmmaker, he came out to Australia and travelled the globe and actually really could create a massive amount of awareness by this very personal story. Most filmmakers aren't in the films, but at the end of the day, it's going to be you as the producer or director that's going to have the greatest impact. A lot of films in the States especially, which could have had a much greater impact when outsourced to impact producers, unfortunately haven't had that same level of success. Engage with the subjects of the film. You obviously aren't going to necessarily get all the subjects who love the film, but if you actually can harness them, they'll be a great asset for the outreach campaign. Because quite often people are far more interested in the subjects of the film rather than having filmmakers talk to them. And you can see that at film festivals, people generally want to ask questions to the subjects of the film rather than the filmmakers. So that can help a huge, can help enormously. You may have seen Kevin Pearce, who was the subject of The Crash Reel, which is that film on the snowboarder who had the horrible crash. When he was out here, it even humanised the film even more, and he was a great ally for their outreach campaign. Know your target. So again, it's are you targeting government? Are you wanting more funding for them or shift in policy? Is it about raising awareness and donations or social action from your community? Is it for education, or is it all of the above? But we chat to a whole lot of filmmakers, and more often than not, they actually haven't even thought through these three basic areas. Who is your initial target? It may be all, it may be only certain sectors of it. Rule number 15, learn how to write a really great funding application. You've got to show that you understand the difference between outreach and distribution, and you've got to research the organisations that you're approaching. There's no point, if you're making a film about Indigenous issues, going to see a foundation that only funds the environment, and it happens the whole time. But if you've done your homework in your application, and there's lots of examples on the web, and I'll do it in the next little section, you'll see where you can find just great funding applications. You know, they want to see that you're going to be involved in this community engagement. Learn from the best. It's sort of a bit of an obvious one, but you know, watch everything, read everything, identify who the key players are, and this best of list. You know, you'll be a huge amount of information there from people who have done the hard yards, and you'll be able to apply your strategies to what they've done. Understand you don't need to spend a fortune on outreach and education. Some of the most effective campaigns have been done for a few $1,000s, so you know, you can make a big impact in a small community. I've seen a film that had a community screening at one community hall, and then it raised some funds there, and then they did it at the next one, and then new funders came in because they could see the impact of it, and you know, that they got the community hall for free. Volunteers, obviously, hosting screenings in people's houses. Asking for funding again after you've had a couple of wins. So these filmmakers have had this community screening, then they went back to their same funders and said, look what we're doing. Align with non-profits. You know, they may have community halls or offices all around Australia, and you don't have to pay for facilities for screenings. And with these not-for-profits, they may share their client list with you, or at least use some of their marketing muscle. Anyway, there's lots of these opportunities that you don't have to be afraid of outreach and education from a point of view of funding. It helps a lot, but you know, you really can do a lot with a little. This is really important. Be aware of any potential conflicts of interest. So, you know, you've got to resist, you know, aligning yourself too closely with the not-for-profit who wants to tell a film in their way. The not-for-profit shouldn't be a part of the production team. It's really important that it's an independent production. It's not an advertorial or film or a promotional one. It's about telling a really engaging story. So the more widely the film can be used, the greater your impact. And you know, consumers are very aware. They'll just smell it if they can feel they're being lectured to and manipulated by the subjects in the film. So got to be aware of that. There are some dangers of outreach. It's important that all parties' expectations are met, that you do keep on defining to your funders, you know, what your expectations are, and equally to your partners, you know, this is what you're wanting to do with it. You've got to be careful of if you're a filmmaker, be careful of filmmaker burnout. As I say, it's an exhausting process, but it's incredibly rewarding, and we've seen it quite a few times of filmmakers who have just literally burned out. You've got to think through, if you're getting funding, especially at the development level, what happens if the film's not made. Things can change and funders can be understanding, but you've obviously got to have a very good reason, if not, because if you've got outreach funding, that has to be quarantined. That really only happens when the film's made. You don't want to be spending outreach funding in production. That can be quite embarrassing. So my recommendation is, if funders are wanting to give outreach funding, you know, that they actually hold off until the film's made, so you don't have a bad experience. Yeah, so it's really all about communication all the way along and understanding these pitfalls. And as I mentioned, it really is all about story. The most effective documentaries will involve stories and characters that are really engaging. You know, it's not about you know, trying to sell an organisation or anything. That it's the story that leads to action. It's not about spoon feeding or making it advertorial about an organisation. So you're probably feeling worn out. Well, I'll get through these quickly. This is sort of the best of guide to the industry, and I think we're about 16 of these. So I'm very biased, but I was really moved by the first Good Pitch event I saw, and so the best social impact event is it's almost sort of creating theatre around documentary storytelling, where you have an audience of about 300 or 400 with a series of chosen films, and you're creating these coalitions in front of the audience. The audience is engaged and participating and helping the funding. This is, you can see here the table in the middle, where you've got a moderator and filmmakers and just this coalition around a table. And Good Pictures raised about $15 million worldwide and created incredible coalitions.
I couldn't really believe that they were starting something in my name.
The power of hearing one voice in solidarity with you can be transformative for people.
I was sick to my stomach when I saw and read the announcement.
Homosexuality is immoral.
Who does this baby belong to? He just hanging around y'all, right? So he see everything that you all do, right? So if this brother right here catch a case, whose fault is it?
If you go to the Good Pitch Squared Australia, do a Google on Good Pitch Australia, you'll see the films we've chosen. We're hoping over the course of 5 and 10 years that we've created a whole new sort of community and generation of high impact films with educated filmmakers and a philanthropic and not-for-profit community that's even stronger than it is today. So that's the intent. Best big social impact media company is Participant Media. They did Inconvenient Truth. You're probably familiar with them, but on their website they have great case studies of all the films that they've used to great effect. So I strongly recommend you go and have a look at the Participant site. A smaller company, Impact Partners, worth having a look at their site. They do a lot of funding of films in this impact space, and they're having an increasing reach in the US. Best Social Impact Outreach Foundation is the fledgling fund. We saw one of their clips earlier on. This is again on their site. They've got a whole lot of different reports on measuring impact. This is another one of their nice little stories, which just simply sort of identifies how your film can inspire change, and it's quite good to use these little films when you're talking to potential funders, just so they get the aha sort of moment of the film is actually something that is worthy of philanthropic or private support. site. They've got this really interesting impact paper, Assessing Creative Media's Social Impact. Again, you'll find that really, really useful. Best documentary, activism company, Working Films. You may be familiar with that. Their website's well worthwhile having a look at. They've got, again, a whole lot of case studies and how-tos, and if you're in the States, they provide a lot of free consulting. You can take your idea and say, what could I do with that? But you'll find a lot of good information there. Best niche social impact documentary company, Chicken and Egg Pictures, especially dedicated towards supporting women filmmakers or subjects about women. They've had a host of Academy Award nominations, and especially in the short film category. But you'll get a lot of information and case studies off their site as well. Best Host a Screening Guide. Again, you'll get a lot of information in these organisations where they've got all the materials and templates, and all you have to do is put in the name of your film and a couple of photos, and you've got everything you need for hosting a screening. So I recommend going to Screening HQ for that. Best Institution, Sundance Institute documentary program. They just do extraordinary things around storytelling and with all their labs, but also a lot of their initiatives. That Good Pitch is one of their initiatives. Stories of Change with the Skull Foundation as films around social entrepreneurs. They've got TED to provide social impact filmmaker awards. They've got Gates Foundation, but they just do wonderful things, Sundance, and again, a lot of good information on their site. One of the best entrepreneur initiatives is this Stories of Change one, where again they've created a lot of funding to actually go and film social entrepreneurs, and again that's created this virtuous circle of more and more funding coming in, because it identifies to philanthropists how they can more easily and effectively use their funding. So that's been a great initiative. Best social action site, Take Part, that's actually aligned with Participant, but you can see all the social impact campaigns that they've done and where they've targeted, and that's it's a great community site, Take Part. This is quite interesting. Genius of Marion was a Good Pitch film. It's about Alzheimer's, and it's a film shot by a young filmmaker who was making a film about his mother, who was writing a book about her mother, who was an artist and got Alzheimer's disease. And during the making of the film, his mother contracted it as well. I'll just show you the trailer.
Does it look funny?
No, it looks wonderful.
Hello. My name is Pamela White, and I am doing a project called The Genius of Marion. And the reason I called her the genius is she was an amazing artist, and I thought it would be nice to keep her alive, at least by not forgetting who she was.
How long have you been working on the book?
Oh, I haven't been working on it that much recently, so I think I should do more on the book. I forgot about The Genius of Marion, didn't I?
are you?
Okay, my situation is, well, first of all, I can't drive because I can't. And I don't like it.
Do you remember when Manna was in this position?
Well, she wasn't in this position, probably. She had Alzheimer's, and I don't.
Didn't the doctor say that you did have early onset Alzheimer's?
Careful.
Beautifully crafted film, really gentle. Went from good pitch, world premiere at Sundance Film Festival, shortlisted for an Academy Award. Yet it wasn't sort of full of facts and figures, and it was really much more about the human condition. When they had a really successful good pitch, they decided that they'd also create this facts and figures video to accompany it. Had these gone into the film, it would have actually ruined the whole narrative of the film. But it was used so effectively because suddenly you had a single person who the audience could relate to who had Alzheimer's, and this has actually put it into context. So again, some documentaries lend themselves to lots of facts and figures. This one didn't, but the two together just absolutely rocket fueled the campaign, and it's been incredibly effective and just brilliantly done. Impact statements are some great ones. So if you go to the BritDoc or Fledgling Fund websites, really useful impact statements on inconvenient truth or end of the line or lioness, and again you'll see sort of almost a template for the sorts of things that you should be considering when you're trying to measure your impact. Best award, Puma Impact Award. Again, if you go to the site, you can see each year 5 outstanding films are chosen, and they've got major case studies behind them. The film which won earlier this year was The Act of Killing. Again, really important film. But you'll see some very good case studies there at the Cuba Award films. Best Australian Documentary Organisation, Documentary Australia Foundation. The organisation's got charitable status, so for anyone making a grant to your film, it goes straight through that and gives the donor the charitable status. But there's a huge amount of information on that site for filmmakers and not-for-profits, charities and foundations. Great web resource there. Best Australian Philanthropic Resource is the Philanthropic Australia one. Again, you can, I think, see who all the key foundations are that are supporting the sorts of areas that you may be making a film about or wanting to work with. Pro Bono and our community of fabulous not-for-profit sort of hubs, and you can see who may be potential partners for your films there. That's a great local resource. We're almost there. There's just sort of randomly picked 11 US documentaries which actually I think had quite an impact in the large and small scale. A lot of them personal stories. Blue Vinyl was very much told through the eyes of someone who'd been affected by vinyl. Bully about the bullying in schools, which had a huge impact in terms of legislative change. The Code, we've probably seen Food Inc., Gasland, Inconvenient Truth, Invisible Law, Lioness, Sympathy, Sin by Silence, and A Small Act. All very good case studies for you to have a look at. And some interesting ones coming up. Pandora's Promise, made by Robert Stone, who's been an anti-nuclear campaigner all his life, and has actually made a pro-nuclear energy film, which launched at Sundance 2 years ago, and is actually, whether you believe in nuclear energy or not, it's actually having a profound impact in terms of decision makers. And even the New York Times last week, who've been anti-nuclear since year dot, came out in a pro-nuclear energy way, saying we have to consider it. Again, all because of the film. One other film which is very relevant at the moment is No Fire Zone, the Caledonia in Sri Lanka. Last week, the Australian government decided not to support the United Nations UNHCR resolution to pursue war crimes in Sri Lanka. This film has actually had an extraordinary impact. I'll show you what it's done. It's pretty harrowing, and I've got here, please be aware that No Fire Zone contains distressing images. I'll just show you the trailer. Again, this is a film which has gone to Good Pitch twice and created some very strong coalitions.
There was this large crowd of people pleading with us as the UN, please don't leave. And suddenly your organisation that you had faith in to help in times of emergency was pulling you out.
The government regarded the UN as impediments to their conquest of the Tamil Tigers. By removing those organisations, there were no longer international witnesses to what was coming.
All of a sudden, bullets were coming, like firing right into the people. You're left knowing that they're going to die. There's nothing we can do.
The government were determined to finish the LTTE off militarily, no matter what it cost, including in civilian lives. They didn't believe that anybody in the international community was prepared to stop them, and they were right.
When I went outside in the morning, the scene was devastating.
The Sri Lankan government were targeting the civilian population.
Isn't it obvious what we're seeing in Sri Lanka? It's a cover-up. It's an attempt to deny that these things took place.
There has to be a proper investigation, and if crimes have been committed, the perpetrators have to be brought to justice.
I called my family and I told my mum, this could be the last time you speak to me.
I think it's difficult to calculate how great the consequences may be if we, the world, continue in this absolute failure to address the truth and the horror of what has happened in Sri Lanka.
Deeply disturbing film. As a result of this film, and only because of this film, UNHCR voted for a UN inquiry into war crimes, and that's just what happened. At Chogam, it was interesting again because of this film. Many governments went there with human rights abuses as their key intent in terms of what they were going to be raising with it. After screenings of the film, Prime Ministers of India and Canada decided to boycott Chogam. David Cameron saw the film and apparently shifted his whole agenda to human rights and sent out a very important tweet explaining so. There's actually even been reports saying that the reason the Queen didn't go is because of any potential embarrassment as a result of this film and sent Prince Charles. That's unconfirmed, but it's been suggested. There's been a huge global screening of the global tour of the screening tour of the film, and a huge amount of press was worldwide. The Sri Lankan government wrote a response to the film and said that the filmmakers fabricated everything, that the statistics of 80,000 civilians having been killed were totally wrong. The government sent it to every politician in Canada and around the world. And Callum McRae, who's the director, had to find additional funding to counter that and came out with an incredibly detailed report. I mean, when you're having to fight past events but also current government sort of propaganda, that was a huge undertaking by the filmmaker. And a lot of organisations around the world said it was one of the best responses and documents to a government that they'd ever seen. Australia seems their response at Chogam was to give the Sri Lankan government 2 patrol boats and formally decided not to co-sponsor the UN resolution. So I guess every government has the right to decide their reaction to it, but it's a work in progress, and the impact of this film has been extraordinary. And I think when you're here and supporting the human rights and arts film festivals, and films like this are out there, it shows the importance of film in terms of raising things that perhaps were expected not to be seen. So I think that's a film which was, as I say, is a work in progress and has already had a huge impact. So thank you for listening. I'm very happy to take any questions, and I hope that was of some use. So.